They laughed the moment they saw her. A Navy warship, a pink rifle. A woman no one took seriously. To the crew of the USS Ronald Reagan, she was a joke, until a hostage distress call shattered the night. When SEALs deployed and the mission collapsed into chaos, the weapon they mocked became the only thing standing between civilians and execution. No speeches, no warnings, just precision, silence, and results that forced an entire ship to rethink who they were laughing at. Because the most dangerous professionals are never the loudest ones. From wherever you're watching, let us know in the comments. And if this story has earned you respect, click like so others can find it too. The steel deck of the USS Ronald Reagan stretched endless under the Pacific sun, heat rising in waves that made the air shimmer and distort. Lieutenant Sarah Keller stood at the edge of the flight deck, rifle slung across her chest, watching F-18s launch into the blue void beyond the carrier's bow. The sound was deafening, a physical force that pressed against her ribs, but she didn't flinch. She never flinched. The rifle against her chest was impossible to miss. Bright pink. Not an accent, not a detail. The entire weapon, receiver, stock, barrel, grip, every inch coated in a shade of rose that seemed to glow against the gray steel and blue water. It looked out of place on a warship, absurd even, like someone had brought a toy to a battlefield. Sarah knew exactly how it looked. She carried it anyway. Behind her, a group of Navy personnel gathered near the island superstructure, their voices low but carrying just enough for her to hear. One of them, a petty officer with too much confidence and not enough experience, pointed in her direction. His buddies leaned in. Laughter rippled through the group. "Look at that," one of them said, loud enough now. "Barbie's tactical division." Another voice joined in. "What's she gonna do? Shoot them with sparkles?" The laughter grew. Sarah didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the horizon, jaw set, hands resting easy on the rifle. She'd heard worse. She'd heard it in briefing rooms, in mess halls, in the belly of transport planes headed into places these men would never see. The mockery didn't touch her anymore. It slid off like water. What they didn't know, what none of them could know, was that the rifle they laughed at had ended more lives than anyone on this ship would ever be told about. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true accounts of courage, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of those who serve. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Lieutenant Sarah Keller was 32 years old, one of only a handful of women to ever complete Navy SEAL training, and the only female operator currently assigned to DevGRU, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the unit most people never said out loud. She had been deployed 7 times. She had operated in countries that didn't officially host American forces. She had done things that would never appear in any record, taken shots that no tribunal would ever review, made decisions in seconds that saved lives and ended others. But on the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan, she was just another body in fatigues, another face the regular Navy crew didn't recognize. To them, she wasn't an operator. She was a novelty, a woman with a pink gun, something to laugh about during smoke breaks and late-night watches. The contrast was sharp. The men who mocked her were loud, casual, their days filled with maintenance schedules and routine drills. Sarah was the opposite, quiet, precise, economical in every movement. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. Her reputation existed in places these sailors would never reach, whispered among men who understood what silence really cost. The pink rifle was a Mk-18, a close-quarters battle variant of the M4, compact, lethal, and modified beyond standard issue. The color wasn't a joke, it wasn't a statement. It was a mark, a signature from an operation 3 years prior in a city that no longer existed on any mission brief. Sarah had been part of a 6-person team tasked with extracting a high-value target from a compound where children were being used as human shields. The enemy knew American rules of engagement. They knew operators hesitated when kids were involved. So the team did something unorthodox. They color-coded their weapons. Bright, unmistakable colors. Pink, yellow, blue. In the chaos of close-quarters combat, in rooms filled with smoke and screaming, those colors became instant identification. Friendly fire dropped to 0. The mission succeeded. 19 hostages walked out alive. Sarah's rifle had accounted for 11 confirmed kills that night, all of them clean, all of them necessary. She kept the weapon afterward, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The SEALs who served with her knew what it meant. The rest of the world saw a pink gun and laughed. That was fine. She didn't need their understanding. The deck officer's voice crackled over the intercom, calling personnel to stations. Sarah turned and walked toward the interior of the ship, boots striking steel in a steady rhythm. As she passed the group of sailors, one of them stepped forward, grinning. "Hey, Lieutenant," he called out. "You get that at a toy store, or did Build-A-Bear start making rifles?" His friends erupted. Sarah stopped. She didn't look at him. She just stood there, silent, letting the moment stretch. The sailor's grin faltered slightly. Then she turned her head, just enough to meet his eyes. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "It's a MK-18, she said. "Effective range 300 meters. Cyclic rate of fire 700 to 900 rounds per minute. Weight 6.3 pounds loaded. I've put 2,000 hours on this weapon. You want to keep talking, or do you have somewhere to be?" The sailor blinked. His friends went quiet. Sarah didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the sun, unsure if they'd just been insulted or educated. That became the pattern. Mockery in the corridors, jokes in the mess, laughter that followed her like a shadow. Sarah endured it without reaction, without defense. She showed up to briefings on time, maintained her gear to perfection, completed every task assigned to her with mechanical efficiency. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for respect. She simply existed in a space that didn't quite know what to do with her. At night, alone in her berth, she disassembled the pink rifle in the dark. Every piece memorized, every movement automatic. She cleaned it by touch, reassembled it blind, checked the action, then set it beside her rack. No one saw that ritual. No one knew that the weapon was the only constant in her life, the only thing that never judged, never doubted, never asked her to prove herself. It just worked. Like her, the USS Ronald Reagan cut through the Pacific, a floating city of 5,000 souls, most of them unaware that a storm was building on the horizon. Sarah felt it before anyone else did. She always did. The second week aboard the carrier brought a joint training exercise, SEAL Team 5 rotating through for live fire drills and close-quarters battle scenarios. The regular Navy crew watched from a distance as operators moved through the ship's interior, setting up kill houses in empty cargo holds, running entries, clearing rooms with a speed and violence that seemed almost choreographed. Sarah observed from the catwalk, arms crossed, eyes tracking every movement. She wasn't part of the exercise. Her team was still in theater overseas. She was only aboard the Reagan because of a logistics delay, waiting for transport back to her unit. Temporary, invisible, a ghost passing through. One of the SEAL instructors noticed her watching. He was older, weathered, the kind of man whose face told stories his mouth never would. He glanced at her rifle, then at her, then back at the rifle. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or suspicion. He didn't approach, not yet, but Sarah felt his attention like a weight. Down on the deck, a petty officer nudged his buddy, pointing up at Sarah. "Think she even knows how to use that thing?" he muttered. His friend laughed. "Probably got it on Instagram. Tactical influencer." The instructor on the floor heard them. He stopped mid-step, turned, and looked directly at the two sailors. His voice carried like a blade. "Shut your mouths." Both of them froze. The instructor didn't say anything else. He just held their gaze until they looked away, then returned to the drill. Sarah watched the exchange without expression. She didn't need anyone to defend her. But the instructor's intervention said something. He knew, or at least he suspected. That night in the ship's armory, Sarah was logging her weapon for the night when the instructor walked in. He moved quietly for a big man, boots barely making sound on the steel floor. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, studying her in silence. "That's a hell of a rifle," he said finally. Sarah didn't look up. She continued wiping down the receiver, her movements methodical. "It does the job," she replied. The instructor stepped closer. He leaned against the wall, eyes still on the weapon. "I knew a guy who carried a yellow one," he said. "Operation out of Mosul, back in 16. Hostage extraction." Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. Then she resumed cleaning. The instructor noticed. "You were there," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah set the cleaning cloth down. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I don't talk about classified operations," she said. The instructor nodded slowly. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I remember the after-action report. I remember hearing about a female operator who made 11 critical shots in under 3 minutes. Perfect placement, no collateral." He paused. "They said she was the best they'd ever seen." Sarah's jaw tightened. She picked up her rifle, checked the chamber one last time, then slung it over her shoulder. "With all due respect, sir," she said quietly, "I'm just doing my job." The instructor straightened. He gave her a small nod, something close to respect in his eyes. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Sarah alone in the armory with the hum of the ship's engines and the weight of words that hadn't needed to be spoken. The storm came on the third week. Not a literal storm, though the Pacific had grown rough, waves slamming against the carrier's hull with enough force to make even seasoned sailors move carefully. The storm was human. A distress call came in at 0300 hours. A cargo vessel, civilian, had been boarded by armed hostiles 200 miles off the coast. The ship's crew was being held below deck. Communications were cut. The situation was escalating. SEAL Team 5 was scrambled. 12 operators geared up in under 10 minutes, moving with the kind of silent efficiency that made it clear they'd done this 1,000 times before. Sarah watched from the passageway as they loaded into helicopters on the flight deck. She wasn't part of the mission. She had no orders. She was supposed to stay aboard the Reagan and wait, but the senior chief in charge of the operation saw her standing there. He hesitated, then walked over. His voice was low, meant only for her. "We're short one breacher," he said. "Peterson's down with food poisoning. Can't deploy." Sarah's pulse didn't quicken. Her breathing didn't change. She just met his eyes and nodded once. The senior chief handed her a vest. "Gear up," he said. "You're with us." 5 minutes later, Sarah Keller was strapped into the belly of an MH-60 Seahawk, the pink rifle across her lap, surrounded by operators who said nothing but noticed everything. The helicopter lifted off the deck, rotors cutting through salt air, and the USS Ronald Reagan disappeared into the darkness behind them. The flight took 30 minutes. No one spoke. The only sound was the rotor wash and the occasional crackle of comms. Sarah checked her rifle for the 10th time. Muscle memory. Ritual. Beside her, one of the younger SEALs glanced at the pink weapon, then at her face. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. The senior chief's voice came through the headset. 2 minutes. Sarah's world narrowed. Everything outside the mission disappeared. The mockery, the laughter, the disrespect, none of it existed anymore. There was only the rifle in her hands, the men beside her, and the job ahead. The Seahawk descended fast, flaring hard over the deck of the cargo ship. Ropes dropped. Operators fast roped down in seconds, boots hitting steel, weapons up. Sarah was fourth in the line. She slid down the rope without hesitation, landed in a crouch, and moved immediately to her position in the stack. The cargo ship was dark. Emergency lights cast everything in red. The team moved through the corridors in near silence, hand signals only, each man covering his sector. Sarah took point on the second entry team, the pink rifle leading the way. They reached the lower deck where the crew was being held. The lead breacher set charges on the door. Everyone stacked tight, ready. The charge blew. The door collapsed inward. The team flooded the room. Everything happened in fractions of seconds. 3 hostiles, armed, scattered positions. The first one raised his weapon toward the entry point. Sarah's rifle cracked twice, center mass. He dropped. The second hostile turned toward the hostages. Another operator engaged, but his angle was blocked by a support beam. Sarah sidestepped, found the gap, fired once. Headshot. Clean. The third hostile grabbed a hostage using him as a shield. The room froze. No one had a shot. The man was screaming, weapon pressed against the hostage's temple. Sarah didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She read the angles, calculated the distance, adjusted for the ship's motion. Then she fired. The round passed 3 inches from the hostage's ear and entered the hostile's eye socket. He collapsed instantly. The hostage dropped to his knees, shaking but alive. The entire engagement lasted 11 seconds. The senior chief keyed his radio. Cargo hold secure. Hostages safe. No friendly casualties. The team moved back toward the extraction point, Sarah at the rear, scanning for threats. No one spoke. But as they climbed back into the helicopter, the young SEAL who'd looked at her rifle earlier caught her eye. He didn't say anything. He just gave her a single nod. Sarah returned it. Then she sat back, rifle across her lap, and let the rotor noise drown out everything else. When they returned to the USS Ronald Reagan, the sun was rising over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The team disembarked quietly, gear dripping with salt spray, faces blank with exhaustion. Sarah walked across the flight deck, heading toward the armory to secure her weapon. A crowd had gathered near the island superstructure. Word of the rescue had already spread through the ship. Sailors lined the walkways, watching as the SEAL team passed. Sarah moved through them without acknowledgement, eyes forward, rifle slung across her back. Then someone started clapping. It was slow at first, hesitant. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire flight deck was applauding. Sarah stopped walking. The sound washed over her. Strange and uncomfortable. She wasn't used to this. She didn't want it. But the senior chief stepped forward, placing himself directly in her path. He didn't salute. That would have been inappropriate given the circumstances. But he extended his hand. Sarah hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm. "You saved 3 lives tonight," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "That shot at the end, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen anything like it." Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak. The senior chief released her hand and stepped back. Then, without a word, the rest of the SEAL team formed a line behind him. One by one, they approached Sarah. No speeches, no grand gestures, just a handshake, a nod, a moment of acknowledgement between professionals who understood what silence cost. The sailors who had mocked her stood at the edge of the crowd. The petty officer who'd made the Barbie joke looked at the ground, shame written across his face. His buddy beside him stared at Sarah with something close to awe. The instructor Sarah had spoken to in the armory stepped forward last. He didn't shake her hand. He just stood at attention, met her eyes, and spoke clearly. "That rifle isn't a joke," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That rifle has saved more American lives than most of us ever will. The woman carrying it is one of the best operators I've ever seen." The flight deck went silent. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, something she'd kept locked away for years. Not pride, not vindication, just relief, the kind that came from finally being seen. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She just gave a small nod, then turned and walked toward the armory. Behind her, the crowd began to disperse, conversations breaking out in hushed tones. The mockery was gone. In its place, something heavier. Respect. The kind that couldn't be demanded. Sarah secured her rifle in the armory, locked the cage, and stood there for a moment in the dim light. She thought about the sailors who'd laughed. She thought about the men who'd fought beside her tonight. She thought about the pink rifle and what it represented, not to them, but to her. Then she turned off the light and walked out. The rest of her time aboard the USS Ronald Reagan passed quietly. No more jokes, no more laughter. When she walked through the corridors, sailors stepped aside, nodding respectfully. When she entered the mess hall, conversations paused, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Word of the rescue spread beyond the ship. The hostages she'd saved spoke to their families. Their families spoke to reporters. Within days, the story reached military channels, sanitized and vague, but present. A female Navy SEAL had been part of a successful hostage rescue in the Pacific. No names were released. No details were confirmed. But everyone aboard the Reagan knew. Sarah became something of a legend on that ship, though she never acknowledged it. She continued her routine, maintained her gear, completed her duties. She didn't change. The world around her did. One afternoon, a young female sailor approached her near the flight deck. The girl couldn't have been more than 20, her uniform still crisp and new. She stopped a few feet away, nervous. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you." Sarah turned, surprised. "For what?" "For showing us it's possible," the sailor replied. Her eyes flicked to the pink rifle. "For not hiding." Sarah studied the girl for a moment. She saw something in her face, something familiar. The uncertainty, the doubt, the quiet determination beneath it all. Sarah's voice was gentle when she spoke. "You don't need my permission to be here," she said. "You already earned your place." The sailor nodded, eyes bright. Then she saluted, crisp and precise. Sarah returned it. The girl walked away, shoulders a little straighter than before. Sarah watched her go, then turned back to the horizon. The Pacific stretched endless before her, blue and indifferent. Somewhere out there, her team was still operating. Somewhere out there, the war continued. But here, on this ship, something had shifted. The mockery had been replaced by understanding. The laughter had been replaced by respect. And the pink rifle, the weapon they'd all dismissed as a joke, had proven what Sarah had always known. True strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply exists, quiet and steady, until the moment it's needed. And when that moment comes, it doesn't hesitate. 2 weeks later, Sarah received orders. Her transport had finally arrived. She would be leaving the USS Ronald Reagan and rejoining her team in theater. On her last night aboard, the senior chief found her in the armory. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Hate to see you go," he said. "Ship's going to be a lot quieter without you." Sarah smiled faintly. "I was barely here." The senior chief shook his head. "You were here enough." He straightened, his expression serious. "That shot you made, in the cargo hold. I wrote it up in my report. Recommended you for a commendation." Sarah's smile faded. "Sir?" "Yes, it is," the senior chief replied. "You did something extraordinary. People need to know." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft. "They don't need to know my name," she said. "They just need to know it's possible." The senior chief studied her, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing," he said. "That rifle. Why pink?" She ran her thumb along down at the weapon in her hands, feeling the texture of the finish. "Because everyone underestimated it," she said. "Just like they underestimated me." The senior chief smiled. "Guess that worked out in your favor." Sarah met his eyes. "Every single time," she replied. The next morning, Sarah Keller walked off the USS Ronald Reagan for the last time. She carried her pink rifle across her chest, her duffel slung over one shoulder. The flight deck was quiet, most of the crew still asleep. But as she approached the waiting helicopter, a small group of sailors stood at attention along the walkway. They didn't say anything. They just watched her pass, a silent acknowledgement of something they couldn't quite put into words. Sarah didn't stop. She didn't wave. She just kept walking, boots striking steel, eyes forward. When she reached the helicopter, she turned back one last time. The USS Ronald Reagan rose behind her, massive and gray, a fortress on the water. Somewhere on that ship, men who had once laughed were now telling stories. Stories about a woman with a pink rifle who made impossible shots. Stories that would spread through the fleet, whispered in ready rooms and mess halls, gaining detail and legend with each retelling. Sarah didn't need to hear them. She knew the truth. And the truth was simple. She was a professional. She did her job. And when the moment came, she delivered. Nothing more. Nothing less. The helicopter lifted off, rotors cutting through the morning air. Sarah watched the carrier shrink into the distance, then turned forward, eyes on the horizon. Somewhere ahead, her team was waiting. Somewhere ahead, the mission continued, and the pink rifle, the weapon that had been mocked and dismissed, would continue to do what it had always done: save lives, end threats, prove that strength comes in forms the world doesn't always recognize, until it's too late to laugh. Moral of the story: true competence doesn't need approval. It only needs opportunity. And when that opportunity comes, the quiet professionals, the ones who endured mockery and doubt, are the ones who deliver. Not with speeches, not with demands, but with precision, discipline, and the kind of silent excellence that speaks louder than any words ever could. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories for more accounts of courage, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of those who serve. Until next time, stay strong, stay humble, and never underestimate the power of those who remain silent until it matters most.